Imagine the roar of Viking longships crashing onto foreign shores, warriors storming villages, and chaos erupting. Amidst the bloodshed and plunder, however, a darker fate awaited the captured women. They were not just spoils of war, they were currency, power, and symbols of status. Behind the legendary sagas and heroic conquests lies a brutal reality often ignored. What truly became of these women? Their untold stories shed light on the haunting price of Viking dominance and the hidden shadows beneath their legendary glory. Enslavement and forced labor. Women captured by Viking raiders were often reduced to the lowest social class in Norse society, known as thralls. These women were taken from lands such as Ireland, England, and the Slavic regions, enduring a brutal transition from freedom to servitude. Once captured, they were forced into a life of grueling labor that was a far cry from the freedom they had once known. As thralls, they performed the most menial and grueling domestic tasks, including cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, and even working in agriculture and textile production. Their lives were shaped by the heavy burdens of physical labor, a stark contrast to the freedom they had in their homelands. The Land of Mobach, an ancient Icelandic text documenting the settlement of Iceland, mentions the significant yet tragic role these women played in Viking households. Some were even given as gifts or traded as commodities, underscoring their lack of autonomy and the harsh reality of their existence. Captured women were seen as nothing more than property to be used, sold, or gifted to others, with little regard for their humanity. These women were integrated into Viking society, but at a great cost to their personal freedom and well-being. The life of a thrall was marked by constant struggle, social stigma, and a lack of personal freedom. They could be punished or killed at their master's whim, and such punishments were often inflicted without consequence. The Gulathing law, a medieval law code from Norway, allowed masters to treat thralls as property. This system was harsh and unforgiving, ensuring that the thrall remained at the bottom of the social ladder, with little hope of escaping their grim fate. Yet, in rare instances, a thrall could be granted freedom. Though their social standing would remain low, they would never be able to reclaim the freedom and dignity they had lost. This harsh reality was passed down to their children. The children born to thralls were also born into slavery, ensuring the continuation of the cycle. While there were some rare cases where thralls could earn their freedom or be granted it by their masters, these instances were exceptions and not the rule. The vast majority of captured women were trapped in the brutal cycle of servitude, and their children would often inherit the same fate, a marriage or concubinage. The Viking way captured women were sometimes taken as concubines by powerful chieftains or wealthy men. These women often seized during raids in lands like Ireland, Scotland, and the Slavic regions. These became secondary partners who bore children but lacked the formal status of a wife. This practice was a common aspect of Viking society where concubinage played an important role in the social and political structure. Viking sagas, such as Egil's Saga and Laxdæla Saga, depict the lives of these concubines, showing how they could influence the household's dynamics by bearing children. Concubines had a slightly higher social standing than enslaved women, but they still remained subordinate to the legitimate wife. They were not considered equals to the wives, and did not have the same rights. In a patriarchal society, concubines were valued primarily for their ability to provide heirs to powerful men, but they had no formal legal standing. They could not inherit land or property, and their children were often denied the status of those born to legitimate marriages. While concubinage was common, the practice of taking concubines was not without its challenges. The Viking society's rigid gender roles meant that concubines were still subjected to strict limitations. The power dynamics in these relationships were dictated by the men who held the power, and the women were seen as tools for their purposes. Despite their higher social position compared to thralls, concubines were still oppressed, and their lives were often dictated by the whims of the men who owned them. The role of concubines was multifaceted. In some cases, powerful men took concubines to strengthen political alliances and expand their influence. Intermarriage with local women was a strategic choice, especially for Viking settlers in regions like the British Isles. Marrying local women allowed them to form political ties, secure land rights, and integrate into new communities. This pragmatic approach not only solidified Viking power, but also helped assimilate Viking culture. It enabled the Vikings to create a hybrid society that drew on both Norse and local traditions, allowing them to integrate with the communities they had conquered. Genetic studies have provided compelling evidence for this practice. Research on the DNA of Iceland's early population reveals that a significant portion of Iceland's early female population was of Celtic origin, supporting historical accounts of Norse raids and the integration of captured women into society. This blending of cultures highlights the complex nature of Viking expansion and the role that captured women played in the process. Ransom and trade as commodities. Captured women were not only enslaved or taken as concubines, they were also viewed as valuable commodities for ransom and trade. During Viking raids, particularly in England and Francia, noble women were often taken hostage to extract wealth from their families. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle documents numerous instances in which noble women were returned to their families in exchange for precious goods such as silver or gold. These ransoms served as a significant source of wealth for Viking chieftains and contributed to their growing power. The practice of ransom was not limited to noble women, however. Many women, regardless of their social class, were captured and sold as slaves. Not all women were fortunate enough to be ransomed and returned to their families. Instead, many were sold in slave markets across Europe and the Middle East. The Russ Primary Chronicle describes how Vikings, known as the Russ, transported captives along river routes to trade in markets throughout Eastern Europe and Asia. Some of these markets included the famous slave markets in Constantinople and the Abbasid Caliphate. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, a 10th-century Arab traveler, wrote extensively about the Viking slave trade along the Volga River. He described the markets where Scandinavian traders exchanged women for silver, silks, spices, and other valuable goods. This network of trade connected Viking territories to vast international commerce routes, demonstrating the economic significance of women as commodities in Viking society. This system of trade was integral to Viking society and fueled the expansion of Viking power throughout Europe and the Middle East. The commodification of women during the Viking Age reflects the harsh realities of the era. Social hierarchies were reinforced through control over human lives, and women were often reduced to mere property. Whether sold in slave markets, ransomed for gold, or taken as concubines, these women were vital to the economy and the political power structures of the Vikings. However, their fates were often tragic, marked by their subjugation and exploitation in Viking society. Some captured women were forced into horrifying religious rituals. These women were sometimes selected to be human sacrifices, a practice deeply intertwined with Norse religious beliefs and the Vikings' warrior culture. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, 10th-century Arab traveler, provides one of the most detailed accounts of this practice. In his writings, he recounts a Viking funeral along the Volga River, where a female slave was chosen to accompany her master into death. This act was believed to ensure that the master would have a servant in the afterlife, reinforcing the belief in the continuation of roles after death. The ritual began with the woman being given intoxicating drinks to dull her senses. Several men, as part of the ceremonial rites, the ritual concluded with her being killed by an elder woman known as the Angel of Death, a priestess who performed the final act of the sacrifice. This was seen as an offering to the gods, with the belief that the woman's death would honor the gods and secure the deceased's journey to the afterlife. While Ibn Fadlan's testimony is one of the few first-hand accounts of this practice, other historical records hint at similar occurrences. Rimbert's Vita Ansgari mentions human sacrifices during religious festivals. Details are sparse. The practice has been the subject of considerable debate among historians. As there is no uniform consensus on how often these sacrifices occurred or how widespread the practice was, archaeological evidence further fuels these discussions. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway, which was discovered in 1904, contained the remains of 2 women, one of whom showed signs of a violent death. Some scholars speculate that this woman might have been a sacrificial victim. Although no definitive proof has been found, similar findings at Trelleborg in Denmark have suggested ritual killings. But these remain open to interpretation. These discoveries underscore the complex and brutal aspects of Viking spirituality, where human life was sometimes seen as the ultimate offering to the gods. The role of women in Viking expansion: while most captured women endured a life of forced labor or became concubines, some managed to play pivotal roles in Viking society. Though often oppressed, these women sometimes found ways to assert themselves, whether through their children or by influencing the Viking settlements. For instance, in regions like the British Isles, Norse settlers would marry local women to form alliances and integrate into new communities. Marrying local women helped the Vikings solidify their influence over the territories they conquered. Genetic studies provide evidence for this practice. Research on the DNA of Iceland's early population reveals that a significant portion of Iceland's early female population was of Celtic origin. This suggests that many Viking women were taken from local populations, blending Viking and Celtic cultures. This cultural fusion played a key role in shaping Viking settlements and ensuring the survival of Viking traditions in newly conquered territories. While some captured women were forced into concubinage or servitude, others served as mediators between the Viking men and local communities. They often helped bridge cultural gaps by communicating in local languages and assisting in the assimilation of Viking settlers into their new environments. This practical role gave certain women a semblance of power and importance, even if they were still oppressed by the patriarchal structures of Viking society. Legacy of Viking women: despite the hardships faced by captured women, their legacy remains integral to the Viking world. While their stories were often overshadowed by the heroic sagas of male warriors, historical and archaeological evidence has slowly shed light on the significant roles these women played. Many of these women bore children who would go on to become important figures in Viking history. The children of captured women were often raised in Viking households, contributing to the continued expansion of Viking influence across Europe and beyond. The legacy of Viking women is also seen in the stories passed down through the centuries. Though many of these stories are rooted in mythology, they reflect the deep respect and admiration Vikings had for strong women. Lagertha, a shield maiden, and Eric's daughter, the daughter of Eric the Red, are two examples of legendary women who played crucial roles in Viking culture. These stories, while sometimes exaggerated, suggest that Viking society respected powerful women, even if their real-world counterparts were often relegated to more subservient roles. Archaeological findings also give insight into the lives of Viking women. The Oseberg ship burial, one of the most significant archaeological discoveries from the Viking Age, contained the remains of two women. One of them was a high-status individual, and some scholars believe that she may have been a warrior or a woman of great influence. This discovery, along with others, suggests that Viking women, while often subjected to harsh treatment, could rise to significant social positions in certain circumstances. Viking women's influence on Norse society. The influence of Viking women extended beyond the domestic sphere. They played a crucial role in maintaining Viking households, particularly when men were away on raids. They managed agricultural production, cared for children, and sometimes even led their communities in the absence of male leaders. In the absence of their husbands, some Viking women were able to take on leadership roles, managing their estates and making important decisions for their households. Additionally, the role of Viking women in trade and commerce cannot be overlooked. Some women, especially those in higher social classes, were involved in Viking trade networks, particularly in the Baltic Sea and along the trade routes to the east. These women helped facilitate the exchange of goods and resources, contributing to the economic growth of Viking societies. In some cases, Viking women could also own property, though this was limited to the higher classes. They had the right to inherit land and could manage their own wealth, which gave them a degree of independence within Viking society. While this was not the norm for all women, it highlights the varying degrees of autonomy that women in Viking society could attain, depending on their status and circumstances. The untold stories of Viking women. The fate of women captured by Vikings reveals a chilling chapter in history, one marked by enslavement, exploitation, and ruthless commodification. Whether forced into labor, taken as concubines, traded for wealth, or even sacrificed, their stories expose the harsh realities behind Viking expansion. These women were more than mere victims. They were pivotal to the social, economic, and political dynamics of Norse society. By understanding their experiences, we uncover the true cost of conquest and the human impact often lost in the echoes of heroic sagas.